This is the video I've been promising where we're going to review the stewarding decisions at the 2025 Italian Grand Prix, and we're going to assess the validity of them and also demonstrate the inconsistencies, because there were various infringements that took place that the stewards didn't even look at, didn't even punish. Now this is a problem, and the reason being we are supposed to be watching the pinnacle of a sport, and we are supposed to be watching a world championship in that sport. Now that world championship is contested over a season where there's numerous events, and at each of those events each driver has got to collect as many points as possible to add to their season long tally, and the person who accumulates the most points is crowned the world champion. Now what happens is, if at these events the stewards manipulate their decisions, impacting different drivers in different ways, altering their finishing positions due to either penalties imposed or not imposing penalties, affecting the number of points that each of those drivers can collect at each of those events, well, that's going to manipulate the World Championship, isn't it? That's then not a valid World Championship. The entire thing is a manipulation. And I'm going to just demonstrate at the Italian Grand Prix that that is the case. I'm going to split this into two videos due to the length of time it will take. In this video, we're going to assess the decisions that the stewards did make. And in the next video, we're going to compare this video with the decisions that the stewards didn't make. And then we're going to look at how each of these decisions impacted that final race result. You can all do this. You can go onto the FIA website. You can look at the documents from the Italian Grand Prix. So from here, document 37 is the final starting grid, and all the ones above that detail the infringements that the stewards determined during that race. So there's document 38, car 31, Ocon, forcing another driver off the track. We're going to go through the document and the footage for that, explaining it through. Document 39, infringement, car 55, failure to follow the race director's instructions. That's Carlos Sainz not returning to the track via the manner in which the race director had instructed him to do so. That's provisional race classification. That is race deleted lap times. Infringement, document 42, we're going to go through this one. Car 12, erratic driving. That's Kimi Antonelli forcing Alex Albon off the track. That should be described in the same way as this one, forcing another driver off the track. This time they've chosen to describe it as erratic driving. So we're going to look at that one. Document 43, car 87 causing a collision. That is the opposite of what actually took place. The wrong guy got penalised, and we're going to go through that incident. There's also two documents here, which are infringements that took place during that race session, and it's from car 14 and car 18, which was Alonso and Stroll, who committed an infringement on the reconnaissance laps, where in the race session, they call it the race session, whereby before the race even starts, all of the cars go out of their garages, down the pit lane, onto the track, around the track, and form up the grid. Then all the blankets are put back on the tyres, the teams attending to their cars. This is well before the formation lap and all that lot. This is just the cars getting to the grid in the first place. Now, exiting the pits, it would appear from the descriptions that both Alonso and Stroll left that pit lane, went over the line onto the track to pass some cars that were stationary in that pit lane, because they were stationary, waiting to perform a practice start in that pit lane on their way out of the pits. Alonso and Stroll went by them and then returned by crossing that white line into the pit lane, and that is in breach of how the race director informed the drivers how they must do it. So they clearly, according to what is being stated here, breached the instructions. We're going to go through the documents and we're going to see how they were punished by the stewards. Now, you see, at the previous Grand Prix, the Dutch Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton was basically determined that he was in breach of what the race director had told the drivers they must do. But the difference with the Lewis Hamilton situation was, this was subjective. This was somebody's opinion, because the instruction is, there's double wave yellow flags, you must slow down. Lewis Hamilton did slow down. They determined that, they didn't think he slowed down enough. Okay, they didn't penalise him there and then. They decided they were going to they'd decide whether or not they were going to penalise him at the end of the race. That's not good enough. When you try to penalise somebody at the end of the race, you already know their outcome, and then you already can assess the impact of the penalty that you are going to impose on them. And therefore, that in itself is a manipulation. If you declare, I'm going to give you a 5-second penalty, I'm going to give you a 10-second penalty for that, then you don't know how that impacts their finishing position. Once that driver has finished the race, you can see how many seconds they are ahead of the other competitors, and you can work out, if I give them a 5-second penalty, that will drop them to this position. If I give them a 10-second penalty, that will drop them to that position. If I give them a 20-second penalty, that will drop them to that position. You know the outcome that you can then manipulate. So therefore, trying to impose a penalty after you know the finishing order and the time gaps, well, that's scope for manipulating the result, isn't it? That should be outlawed. But that is what they do. Understand that that is diabolical. That is not a way of operating a sport. Okay? Manipulating the result based on something that you do after the event, when you can clearly make this decision. This happened to Lewis Hamilton before that Grand Prix started. They could have easily looked at that and determined whether or not they were going to impose any form of penalty. Okay? Should Lewis Hamilton have been adjudicated to be penalised, that penalty applies to that event. What they looked at, he didn't finish this event, so we're going to actually screw him over for the next event now. That's a manipulation. So you're impacting his championship because you're now going to screw him over for the next event because you've seen that he didn't finish this one. When your supposed infringement, which is something you decided was an infringement because you decided, because there's no clear guidelines as to what constitutes enough slowing down, but you determined that, in your opinion, you didn't think that that was slowed enough. Now, the difference with the Stroll and the Alonso incident is it's not a discretionary situation. We'll read through what they have to say. Car 18 crossed back into the pit exit road when exiting the pits during the reconnaissance laps. So here, and all they got was a warning for this. The stewards reviewed video and in-car video evidence. So all they need to do is look at the video of the situation. They didn't need to look at the telemetry. They didn't need to ask the driver what the driver thought. They didn't need to have a meeting, get the driver's representative there. They can just look at the situation and go, yes, that has clearly happened, hasn't it? Right. The driver of car 18 exited the pits during the reconnaissance laps without doing a practice start. He crossed the pit exit line when passing the drivers queuing for practice starts as prescribed in the race director's event notes, but then crossed back into the pit exit road instead of moving to the regular racing line. This is in breach of item 15.3 of the race director's event notes. As no dangerous situation was caused in any way and no other cars were affected by the infringement, the stewards determined that a warning to the drivers is sufficient in this case. So that was the stewards determined that, yes, he's breached what he was told to do, but it wasn't dangerous, so we'll just give him a warning. And the same for Alonso. Okay? No, sorry, I've gone on to a different document there. This is Alonso. The stewards reviewed the video evidence, and Alonso crossed the pit exit line when passing queuing for the practice starts, and then crossed back into the pit exit road. There are clear instructions. You breach them instructions. What's the consequence for that? Nothing. There were instructions at the Dutch Grand Prix. Hamilton obeyed the instructions because you have to ease off. He did ease off. The decision was, but we didn't think he eased off enough. You get a 5-place grid drop at your next event. These penalties are arbitrary, aren't they? Now, in terms of crossing lines, there's one here. whereby a car 44 crossed the white line at pit entry in a race session. Car 44 crossed the white line at pit entry when entering the pits. The manoeuvre was not considered dangerous in any way. Therefore, the least severe penalty available is imposed, a 5-second time penalty. So if it's not dangerous, okay, if it's not dangerous in any way, the least severe penalty available is a 5-second time penalty when it's Lewis Hamilton that is deemed to infringe. When somebody has made an infringement clearly in breach of what the race director has told them they must do, no penalty for Alonso, no penalty for Stroll. Something's not right here. When different drivers get different penalties, different outcomes, this is not an authentic World Championship. And that, when you apply these penalties to these drivers, impacts their finishing positions, impacts the points that they achieve from this event. And when you look at every race this season and look at all of these discrepancies, you get different finishing positions within the World Championship table. This is not an authentic sport. So now let's go through the documents and we'll go through them and look at the footage that proves the magnitude of the penalty, the stewarding decision, and just how wrong the Oliver Bearman situation was. And then we're going to look at the situations where the stewards did not even look at them. Max Verstappen forcing Lando Norris off the track twice. Okay. We've also got an incident between Tsunoda and Hadjar, I believe it was, or it could be Lawson. 2 Red Bull stable cars. There's no mention of that in the stewards' documents. So we'll take a look. Anyway, that'll be for the next video when we go through the incidents that the stewards didn't assess. So this one that they did, document 38, Esteban Ocon, glorious Esteban, forced car 18 off the track on the approach to turn 4. And this, forcing another car off the track, is in breach of Appendix L, Chapter 4, Article 2B of the FIA International Sporting Code. Okay, forcing another car off the track. He got a 5-second time penalty and 1 penalty point. Now I thought, if we look at the Lewis Hamilton penalty, a 5-second penalty here, because the manoeuvre was not considered dangerous in any way, therefore the least severe penalty available is imposed. So when something's not dangerous, you can give a 5-second penalty. When you force another car off the track, that's dangerous. You're forcing another car off the track. That creates danger. That is a risk to that driver that's being forced off the track. That's risking a collision. Were they not to move off the track, there would be a collision because your car, the car that's doing the forcing, is ending up in the space that the other car is. That equals a collision. That equals dangerous. So this is more than a 5-second penalty. But you've only imposed a 5-second penalty here. You see, these penalty system, it doesn't make sense, does it? The stewards reviewed video and in-car video evidence. So all we need to assess this is the video footage of it taking place. We don't need to invite Max Verstappen into the steward's office after the event to ask Max what he thinks, to ask Max's representatives from the Red Bull team what they think, to look at the steward marshalling data system, the telemetry and everything else that they bullshit us with when it involves Max Verstappen. They don't need any of that. All you need to do is look at the video evidence of what is actually taking place and determine. We didn't need to wait till after the event for them to determine this. They were able to do that there and then. So, the driver of car 31 defended his position, and all this is waffle. We don't even need to listen to this bullshit. This is just absolute gaslighting hogwash. Because I'll talk you through what we need to explain here. The driver of car 31 defended his position to car 18 and moved back towards the racing line on the approach to turn 4, with car 18 being alongside on the outside. Car 31 did not leave sufficient space on the outside and forced car 18 off the track. Competitors are reminded they have the right to appeal. Okay, right. Now, it says here, decisions of the stewards are taken independently of the FIA and are based solely on the relevant regulations, guidelines and evidence presented. Why are you trying to absolve the FIA of accountability for this? This is a Grand Prix, Formula One Grand Prix. The governing body for that is the FIA. The FIA have to supply the officials to that who make judgment calls on that event in accordance with the rules and regulations of the sport, which are the FIA rules and regulations of the sport. So this is the FIA supplied officials, the stewards this is, and yet you're trying to say that the decisions of those stewards are independent of the FIA. They're not independent. They're making their decisions on your behalf at your event. They're not independent decisions, are they? So don't try and absolve yourself of blame or responsibility for the decisions that these people that you have contracted to make these decisions. You are responsible for them decisions that these people make because you have put them people in place to make those decisions. So, Felix Holter and Derek Warwick made these decisions at the 2025 Italian Grand Prix. These are two of the corrupt four stewards that corruptly made the decisions at the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. People don't understand just how corrupt that was. They don't understand the nature of that appeal. At the end of Abu Dhabi 2021, the simple situation was Mercedes appealed to the stewards to say the governing body, the race director here, has breached the rules and regulations of the sport with what he has done. These are the regulations. This is what must be done. This is what he did do. That is wrong. And as such, that ending is not valid, and this is what needs to be applied. Essentially, the race result has to be declared at the end of the last valid lap, which was the lap before the rules were broken. And that's all there is to it. And all the stewards had to do was understand that, okay, Mercedes are saying, here are the rules. Yes, they are the rules. Here is what the race director did, and yes, that's what he did, and that is not in accordance with the rules. Correct. And therefore, there is no validity to then what took place after the rules were broken. And that's correct. And that's why you have that appeal system for certain things like that. And that's what they have at their disposal, the power to then undo something that was wrong and retrospectively make it right. That's why you have that stewards appeal system. That's what it exists for. Rather than do that, those stewards at Abu Dhabi ask Red Bull to come along and ask Red Bull to create a counter argument. They sent Red Bull away for 40 minutes and then allowed Red Bull to present a fictitious set of arguments to try to justify what race controller did. None of those supposed justifications had any validity, and yet the stewards went, oh, we agree with Red Bull on this. That is utter corruption. The world doesn't understand that. They've never been explained that by mainstream media, because mainstream media is complicit with the billionaire narrative. We're all being lied to. Anyway, we're looking at the Italian Grand Prix. I'm just explaining that Holter and Warwick are frauds. They are entirely corrupt. Those people that will say, move on from Abu Dhabi already. We're all having a great time. Lewis has moved on, so must we all. No. When the corruption remains, you are always going to see that corruption continues until the rotten core is exposed and held to account for it, and it is eradicated from the sport. You are not watching authentic sport. You are watching a manipulation by corrupt individuals that are employed by this sport, that are part of this sport. It is rotten to the core. So, Ocon is guilty of forcing a driver off the track. If something's not dangerous, the minimum penalty of 5 seconds applies. Let's have a look what goes on here. Lance Stroll, the car that is looking to overtake Ocon. What Ocon is doing, knowing that he's coming up to that chicane where it's the first part of it is a left-hand turn, he's defending the inside line to that corner, so therefore it opens up the overtaking opportunity on the outside for Stroll. Now, were he not overtaking, the racing line is more a case of them coming over to this right-hand side of the track that opens the corner up, allowing them to go from the right-hand side of the track across to the apex of the corner, and then that sweeps them out to the outside of the track on exit. That makes the corner as wide a sweep as possible, enabling the drivers to carry as much speed through that curve as possible. Okay? When cars are side by side, neither is entitled to the racing line, because neither car can start here and sweep over to the apex and end up on the outside of the track. This car has the car on his inside, so it can't make it to the apex. This car here has a car on his outside, so it can't start off wide and it can't finish wide. They've got to take account of each other and position their cars relative to one another. So the racing line becomes irrelevant, and we'll come to that in the future documents. So what's happening now? Stroll is attacking, which he's perfectly entitled to do. There is space here. He's going into that space. He is now partially alongside. Because he's partially alongside, this car has to be aware that there is a car partially alongside him. You cannot move into that car space. You have to leave this car track space, and that track space is at least the width of this car on the track. From this white line, this direction of tarmac, at least a car's width and a safety margin. So if the car is 2 meters wide, you have to leave at least 2 meters of track plus a safety margin, because you do not want these cars contacting one another. You cannot move into this car space, because if you do, these cars will collide and you will be the car that causes that collision. Now, because this is a overtaking maneuver around the outside, well, we'll come to that as we get closer to the corner. Let's see what actually happens here. Stroll is perfectly entitled to be here, but Ocon is moving over still, which is forcing Lance Stroll onto the white line. He shouldn't have to be there. He is entitled to be at a full car's width on the track. And look at Ocon now. Look at how much he's squeezed Lance Stroll. And should Lance Stroll not move his car to the right, and now he's got his tyre on the grass, this right tyre, had he have not done that, there would have been a collision. You have forced him off the track. Now, the children that now watch the show are conditioned to believe this is not off the track. He's still on the track. No. You've been told, because this is the way that they do it, is when you are lapping around that track, you are not deemed to have left the track, providing the inside tyre, this one here on this particular picture, Lance Stroll's left-hand tyre, as long as that doesn't cross the white line, he is classified as still being on track. Okay, in terms of setting a lap time, that is how they adjudicate that. But the reality is, this right-hand tyre here is not on the track. It is entitled to be on the track. It should be on the track. It has been forced off the track because the other driver has ran him out of room and he's had to move his car so that this tyre is off the track. That constitutes being crowded off the track. That is an infringement by Ocon. So this is what's happened. He has been, look at how close they are. Ocon has forced himself here, and had Stroll not have taken this line here, there would have been a collision. Had Stroll have remained on the track fully with this right-hand tyre, had that been inside the white line, which is entitled to be, Ocon's manoeuvre would have created contact between those two cars. Ocon is the infringer. That is a dangerous manoeuvre. That is more than a 5-second penalty. That is what has taken place. So what is added to the danger is now this tyre has picked up dirt from having to leave the track. That's reduced grip. That has meant that this driver is now put in a dangerous situation. So Stroll is trying to make it around the corner. He's clearly lost some sort of traction. Okay, he's having to counter steer and leave the track. Now, fortunately, there is a runoff area there, which he's been able to make it onto. Ocon's actions resulted in Lance Stroll being put into a dangerous situation. So Lance Stroll has departed the track. Race director's notes are that if you depart the track at this location, you have to stay to the right of this yellow line here and follow this route to make it back onto the track. There are two reasons for this. Number one, you do not make a shortcut by missing out the chicane. So you do not gain an advantage. You follow this route around, which means that the time it takes to follow this route round is slightly longer than what it would take you to remain on track and go through the chicane. So that's one reason. The second reason is to enable you to filter back onto that live racetrack in a safe manner. Those cars on track are travelling faster than you now. You are re-emerging onto a live racetrack. They are having to contend with you. So you filter around via this lane at a point in time where they can clearly see that you are now entering the track at this point. You are entering the track on this side of the track. The racing line is over the far side of the track. So that gives a safer environment for you to re-emerge onto that track. So that is why the race director has made that stipulation. Should you depart the track at that chicane, that is how you rejoin the track. That is the safe manner that they've put in place for you to do that, which Lance Stroll has now done. We go back to that penalty. That's the race result. Just a 5-second penalty for creating a dangerous situation and forcing another driver off the track. That should be a 10-second penalty to Esteban Ocon. Next steward's decision, document 39. Carlos Sainz. Okay, and what the infringement is car 55 did not use the escape road at turn 4/5 after missing turn 4. So what I've just explained about Lance Stroll doing to return to the track, Carlos Sainz did not do. That is a breach of Article 12.2.1 of the FIA International Sporting Code and non-compliance with the race director's events notes. And they just gave him a reprimand. No penalty. The stewards reviewed video and in-car video. So all they needed to do was look at the video. They didn't need to wait till the end of the race. They didn't need to ask Carlos Sainz to attend the stewards with a representative and review the marshalling, positioning data and the telemetry and all the things that they have to review when determining whether or not they're allowed to give Max Verstappen a penalty. Car 55, just from the cameras, locked up the front left into turn 4, resulting the car to leave the track in turn 4 and pass to the right of the gravel trap. Car 55 then proceeded to rejoin the track without following the escape road as prescribed in the race director's events notes. The stewards note that in this case, other than in some prior incidents of similar nature, there were no mitigating circumstances such as other drivers impacting the braking or the line into the corner. So the stewards are saying there's no mitigating circumstances here. Carlos wasn't jumping out of the way of another car. He hadn't been forced off. This was just an error from Carlos Sainz. So it's not as though you can let him off without penalty because he was just doing the right thing that he had to do to avoid a collision. No, he made an error. So let's have a look at the video of this. That's this one. This is Carlos Sainz heading towards that chicane. 50-metre board here. We'll see the lockup. There it is. He's locking up. Because he's made that error, he's now not in control of his car to make it around this chicane. Locking up again. So what has he done? Rather than risk spinning at that chicane, rather than risk going off the track on exit of that first corner, he's just bailed out. Now, what he has to do if he's bailing out is to keep to the right of that yellow line. What does he do? Look at where he's steering. He's made no attempt. Look at his steering wheel as we depart the track. Nah, won't bother with what the race directors told me to do. He's steering fully left now. Now, rather than go around here and rejoin there, okay, negating the time that he's gaining from cutting that chicane off, he just goes across here, takes that shortcut, and rather than rejoin the track there where the other drivers have had the chance to observe that he is now rejoining the track and therefore make allowances for that, what happens with Carlos Sainz? Here, he's joined the track at the wrong point. So there's a Haas car here. It doesn't seem to have gained any advantage on that Haas car, but that's really irrelevant. Has he lost positions here? Had he have locked up and span at that corner, gone off the track at the other part of the chicane, would he have lost a position with the car behind him? So here he is, he's locking up, there's a car behind him. Now, had he have lost control here and gone off the track here and then tried to get back on the track, this car that's behind him, would that have gained position on him? Here are these three cars. What's happening with that car back there? Oh, it's still back there. So Carlos Sainz has locked up, made an error, not done what he's required to do, and maintained his position. And the stewards, what have they done? Let's get to the right one. This one. Just gave him a reprimand. So what you've done is you potentially gained a time advantage by taking a shortcut. You've maintained your position ahead of the car that was behind you, even though you went off the track. You've rejoined the track in a manner that is not deemed safe, because the safe manner of rejoining was to follow the race director's method of rejoining, which is done so to create a safe way of rejoining the track, and yet they did nothing. So not only is it gaining a slight advantage over that car in front of you, maintaining that, not losing out when you made a mistake, there's a safety issue in that as well. And they didn't do anything. He's done things entirely wrong, and they didn't do anything. Here, Lewis Hamilton crossed the white line. They said it wasn't dangerous, and they gave him a penalty. There's a problem here. So, that's Carlos Sainz. No penalty there. That should have been probably a 10-second penalty. 5 seconds for the fact that, well, a 10-second penalty on the grounds that he didn't follow the race director's instructions. If you don't follow the race director's instructions, there needs to be a consequence for that, a penalty. In doing so, he essentially cut the chicane without following the route required that would negate any advantage by cutting that chicane. And he didn't rejoin the track in the correct manner, which is a safety concern. And he maintained an advantage over the car that was behind him, which otherwise would have lost, or potentially could have lost. But he bailed out of losing control and instead took a shortcut. So actually benefited by just going, oh, I've got things wrong, but instead I'll just take a shortcut, won't do what's asked of me. Well, no, you're getting this all wrong. That's at least a 10-second penalty for all what he's done. The stewards has noted here there's no mitigating circumstance for this. He wasn't forced into that. That was just his error. And yet he paid no penalty for that whatsoever. Completely neglected the instructions that were given to him, which are given on the grounds of sporting fairness and safety. And he's completely ignored them without consequence. Who's applying these consequences and to whom? That is a 10-second penalty to Sainz where he got nothing. The next stewarding decision. This is document 42. Kimi Antonelli. Car 12 forced car 23 onto the grass at high speed before turn 3. And they've given him a 5-second time penalty and 1 penalty point. This is also a breach of Appendix L, Chapter 4, Article 2E of the International Sporting Code. Forcing another driver onto the grass is dangerous. You are putting them in a situation where they could easily lose control. Were they not to move on the grass, you're moving your car into an area that they should occupy on the track. I've got a right to occupy on the track. Therefore, you would be causing a collision. They've had to avoid that collision. That is a safety issue. You've said here in this document, the manoeuvre was not considered dangerous in any way, therefore the least severe penalty available is imposed. This is dangerous, so you cannot just impose the minimum penalty of 5 seconds. This is at least a 10-second penalty. So let's have a look what they give us their reason. Ultimately, these reasons are irrelevant. It's waffle. We look at the video. So how did they determine? Did they have to say, oh, we'll have a look at this after the race, invite Max in to give his excuses, invite Red Bull in for Red Bull to tell us whether they're allowed to be punished or not? Review the marshalling system data, the telemetry, the in-car evidence, all the bullshit that they claim they have to review when it's involving Max Verstappen. No, they can just look at the video. The video of what's going on and the in-car video is sufficient to determine what the problem is here. Car 23 had a run. Doesn't matter who's got a run, okay? All it matters is where are the locations of the cars, who's doing what. Simple. Car 23 had a run on car 12 after turn 2 and into turn 3. When car 23 was in the process of pulling alongside car 12 at high speed, it doesn't matter whether it's high speed or low speed. Okay? The speed that they're travelling at, okay, at high speed actually makes it more dangerous. So therefore, gives scope to a greater penalty. Okay? Because it's more dangerous. At high speed, the driver of car 12 moved to the left and squeezed car 23, who had 2 wheels on the grass. Let me just read through this again to make sense of it. When car 23 was in the process of pulling alongside car 12 at high speed, the driver of car 12 moved to the left and squeezed car 23, who had 2 wheels on the grass. Was he made to have 2 wheels on the grass because this car was moving over onto him? So if he didn't move onto the grass, he'd have been ran into by Antonelli. Yeah, that. The stewards determined that by doing this, he drove in a manner deemed it is dangerous. It is dangerous. You drive into the line that another car is on, into its track space. That's dangerous. If it doesn't jump out the way, if it doesn't steer itself away from where you're moving into, there is a collision. You have created that danger by not recognising that that car is there, it's entitled to be there, and you've moved into its space. That is crowding another car. You're crowding a car on the track, you're having to make it take evasive action to avoid a collision, you're driving dangerously. You're doing this at high speed. That increases the level of danger. That increases it from a 10-second penalty to a 20-second penalty. So, the stewards determined that by doing this, he drove in a manner deemed potentially dangerous to car 23. However, the stewards also acknowledge that the driver of car 23 was able to maintain control of his irrelevant and was subsequently able to overtake car 12 into turn 4. A 5-second time penalty is deemed sufficient in this case, given the circumstances. No, you aren't actually supposed to be looking at the outcomes, so you tell us. The fact that he was able to maintain control of his car, the fact that he was able to deal with his tyres getting dirty, the fact that he was able to then still slipstream Antonelli and perform an overtaking manoeuvre is irrelevant. What's relevant is the manner in which Antonelli drove. He had a car that was trying to attempt to pass him, and Antonelli drove across him. That is a dangerous manoeuvre. You've crowded him on the track. You've done so at speed. You've created a dangerous situation. That's a 10-second penalty. You've crowded him off the track, but you've done so at speed. That doubles the jeopardy. That's a 20-second penalty. You've given him a 5-second penalty. Let's have a look. Rear view of Antonelli's car. This is all I've got to be able to show you of this. So it's Albon that's looking to pass him. So Albon there, as you can see, it's getting his front wing is now level with Antonelli's rear tyres. So he started to put some of his car alongside Antonelli. Antonelli has to recognise that this car is gaining on him because he started off behind him. Okay, from here, Albon is behind. Albon is gaining on him. And now part of his car is alongside Antonelli's car. It's too late to block him off. Back here, if Antonelli moves across to his left, blocking that line for Albon, that's not a problem, whilst Albon is fully behind him. But by moving across here to block him off, that means he has to stay there because he can only defend that position with one manoeuvre. That would open up the space down the outside for Albon to attack. But no, Albon is moving into this position here. So he's coming up and he's placed his car now on the inside of Antonelli. And part of his car is there on the inside. He's on the track. He's there on the inside. He's entitled to track room. Antonelli continues to move over. And in doing so, he runs Albon off the track. Had Albon attempted to remain on track, there would have been a collision because Antonelli has moved across here. This, whilst it's not a straight, it's a flowing curve. And cars are expected, they're accelerating through this area of track. It's not a braking zone where you're assessing the relative locations of cars to determine who's entitled to what track room. This is a flowing curve where they're still accelerating, and if part of a car gets alongside part of another car, you're both entitled to track room. You can't run the other car out of track room. You can't force them to have to put part of their car off the track. That is what Antonelli did. Because it's a high-speed section of the track where he's done so, that is a more severe infringement because it escalates the danger involved. 20-second penalty. They gave him 5. We play it through. Albon now with dirty tyres, having to have eased off, because if you continue with your throttle down on the grass, one side of your car's got much less traction than the other side and you're likely to spin. So he's eased off. He's got himself back onto the track and now he goes again. Got in the slipstream. Now it might be mitigating circumstances had Antonelli just clearly conceded this position, moved over and waved him by. I've committed an infringement. I've got it wrong. Have the position. He's still committed an infringement. He's still done something dangerous, but that might mitigate the penalty. But what he's done here is, this is slipstreaming by Albon. Antonelli's defending the inside of the track. We're now riding on board with Albon after the incident. Antonelli's defending the inside of the track. And let me just see if I can. We're now, this is the 100-meter board. Albon's ahead. And essentially, we can't see where Antonelli is relative to Albon here. So we don't know if Antonelli was halfway alongside going into the braking zone. which would have entitled him to racing room around this corner, but it would appear that Antonelli's actually backed out and conceded position there. Okay, but we don't know if Albon had managed to get himself fully ahead in any case. Ultimately, that level of penalty was not sufficient. It should have been at least 10 and quite possibly 20 seconds. But that is what the stewards have decided. So there's 3 incidents. And now we go into the 4th incident, which is this one, which is absolutely ridiculous. Oliver Bearman, okay, car 87 collided with car 55 at turn 4. A breach of Appendix L, Chapter 4, Article 2D of the FIA International Sporting Code. A 10-second time penalty. Now, 2 penalty points on his licence. The stewards reviewed video and in-car video evidence. This is a collision, okay? 2 cars colliding, and the stewards reviewed video and in-car video evidence, because that's all you need to do, you see. Unlike when it involves Max Verstappen, and what they have to do is the stewards have to hear from the driver of car 1 and the other driver from team representatives and review the position, marshalling system data, video, timing, telemetry, and in-car video evidence when it involves Max Verstappen. You see, that's what they have to do when it involves Max. But when it involves anybody else, they can just look at the video and impose the penalty there and then. Not wait till they hear what Max has to say in the comments section. The driver of car 44, 14. What a load of waffle. Nobody cares about him exiting the pits. Oh no, sorry, this is the wrong document. This is the one that we need to talk about here. The stewards reviewed video and in-car video evidence. Car 55 attempted to overtake car 87 on the outside into turn 4. And had its front axle ahead of the front axle of car 87 at the apex. That is bollocks. And I'm going to demonstrate that that is utter bollocks, because the collision took place before the apex. This is nothing to do with a race to the apex. If you are racing to the apex, you have to leave each other room to race to the apex. If you've collided with that person prior to the apex, you have crowded them prior to the apex and caused the collision prior to the apex. So the notion of apex is utter bollocks. Racing to the apex is utter bollocks, because that is too late to determine who has won the race to the apex, and therefore, now that we've determined that, who is entitled to what room on exit of this corner. That's too late, because you've been racing to that apex so hard, you're going so fast that you now can't determine where you end up. Where you end up is where you end up. You can't go, oh, you're now a centimetre ahead of me, you're entitled to the line and I'm not. I'm a centimetre ahead of you, I'm entitled to the line and you're not. No, you're too late to make that call. You can't bail out of it at that point. You can't give them room if you've not given them the room by then. You've got to make this decision at the braking zone, where you're slowing yourself down to an appropriate speed to take the appropriate line, depending upon whether the other car has earned the right to track room on exit of the corner. This is a false narrative being given to everybody by the show. A false narrative that they've invented since Max Verstappen entered the sport to validate Max Verstappen's driving, which they will tell you is the best you've ever seen. Yet you can't do it properly. Now let's have a look again at what they're saying here. It's lies, and we're going to go through the incident. The driver, car 55 attempted to overtake car 87 on the outside into turn 4 and had its front axle ahead of the front axle of car 87 at the apex, thereby earning the right to the racing line. That is utter bollocks. There is no racing line around there. When two cars are contesting going into a corner, neither car is on the racing line. Neither car is on the racing line. And let me just explain this to you. Let's play this through a little bit. So this is the lead up. Bearman is in front. Sainz is the attacking car. They're coming down the straight towards turn 4. Sainz has got the overspeed. He's alongside and now slightly ahead of Bearman. He has not completed the overtake yet. That overtake is not complete. Sainz never got himself fully ahead and therefore is entitled to drop himself in front of the car that he's just overtaken. They are still contesting that position. Bearman is still entitled to be contesting that position. So, we're now going through a corner that is being contested with two cars perfectly allowed to contest it because Sainz did not complete the overtake. And let's just double check so you can see. So, braking zone. Two cars entering a corner. Sainz, the car that's doing the overtaking on the outside, had to be at least alongside. We're back here, had to be at least alongside, which he was. See if I can stop it immediately as we come into view. He was at least alongside Bearman. He was ahead of Bearman slightly. His nose of his car was ahead. He might have been half a car length ahead. He never got himself fully ahead and therefore entitled to move across Bearman to shut him off for the corner. That overtake was never complete, even though he had got himself slightly ahead. Bearman is still able to contest this, still try and fight this position. So, what this means is, going around this corner, each car has to leave each other track room. The racing line is on entry to this corner. You will try to keep as wide as possible, and then you will try and sweep across to the curbing here, the apex of the corner, clip that, and that sweeps you out wide on exit. Neither driver is entitled to that because Sainz here has to leave space on the inside, so he cannot sweep across to this curb. He has to leave a car's width in between this curb and himself for the car that's on his inside. Bearman cannot start out here on the outside of the track on the racing line because Sainz is there. And likewise on exit of this corner, Bearman cannot sweep himself fully wide on exit because he has to leave space for Sainz. So neither car can take the racing line. Neither one of them can, and yet the stewards write this in their report, which is absolute bollocks. The driver of car 87 defended his position on the inside instead of giving up the position and caused a collision. No, he's entitled to be in there. So here you're trying to say thereby earning the right to the racing line. Absolutely not. He has not earned the right to the racing line. He did not complete that overtake. If let's say Bearman had been the attacking car at the braking zone, he has to be halfway alongside, which again, we've only just come into view here. We'd expect the braking zone to be perhaps back here. It would be late, coming in this late. But you could potentially argue what would be determining this if you overlaid the average braking position of these drivers and determine that as the braking zone for this corner, which is easy for them to do, but they don't do it because they like inciting the controversy and the debate in the comment section, and they love the arguments. But that's easily solvable, but they won't solve it. Okay, you could determine the braking zone and you can make them assessments and clearly say, well, here's the braking zone, where were they at the braking zone, and who is entitled to what. But arguably, you could say that Bearman, had he been the overtaking car, he's entitled to track room here. He's now being the car that's being overtaken, but the car that's trying to overtake him hasn't got fully ahead. So he doesn't have to yield. All he has to do is make sure that on exit of this corner, he leaves sufficient room on the track for the car that's attacking him. That's all he has to do. But the stewards are saying that it's this one, isn't it? That Bearman had to concede that. No, he didn't. The stewards determined that the driver of car 87 is predominantly at fault and is therefore the standard penalty for such incidents is applied. And they've given him a 10-second time penalty and 2 penalty points on his licence. 10 seconds. So let's go through the incident. 2 cars. Car on the outside. He's ahead, okay? He had to be at least alongside to be entitled to track room on exit. He'd not completed the overtake prior to this corner, so they are contesting this corner still. Both drivers are entitled to be competing around this corner because this driver's not ahead, okay? This driver had earned the right to be competing around the corner. So they're competing. They're turning into the corner. The car on the outside has to leave a car's width for the car on the inside. The car on the inside is entitled to take this line around the inside. Look at the direction of Carlos Sainz's car. Look at the trajectory of Carlos Sainz's car. There is not a car's width on the inside. There has to be a car's width between here and here. Now, let's say, for example, the cars do mount the curbing and part of his car goes on there, and let's say there's no contact. Then often that is deemed good enough. There was no collision. The drivers have navigated their way through that situation. We'll accept that as motor racing. But by the letter of the law there has to be a car's width for the car on the inside. Look at Carlos Sainz. He is not leaving him a car's width. There's the impact. Where's the apex? Well, the apex is here. Neither driver has made it to the apex. And the stewards have told you here that car 55 attempted an overtake on the outside and had its front axle ahead of the front axle of 87 at the apex. The collision occurred before the apex. He's driven across the line of the other car before the apex. You've driven into the space that this car is. This car was entitled to be there. You can see Bearman's. Look at where Bearman's placing his car. Does the trajectory of Bearman's car look like it is travelling towards this white line here, which he's entitled to do? Yes. Look at Sainz's car. When Bearman needs to occupy this space here, Carlos Sainz is driving into that space there. That's crowding him. That's driven his car into the space that Ollie Bearman's car is going to be in. That is causing a collision. There is the collision. Right there. Here's the apex. Where's Bearman going to go? Cause collision. Debris flying up. Damage caused. Potentially to Bearman's car. I can't identify whether it's Bearman's car that's damaged or Sainz's car. A collision can damage cars. There is debris flying off at least Carlos Sainz's car, perhaps Bearman's car. Bearman is now losing a lot of time, having been collided with. The car that was attempting to overtake him, Sainz, didn't perform a legal overtake because he collided with him. Now he's ahead of Bearman. Not only has the car that was illegally overtaken him collided him, knocked him off the track there, gone ahead of him, it's also resulted in a racing ball passing Bearman. So in that incident, an illegal overtaking manoeuvre by Sainz, Bearman has had his race impacted. He's dropped 2 positions in the race and lost 20 seconds of race time. We look at this. Let's see if we can see the time differences here before the collision. I don't know if they're actually on there. They might not play this through. So here they are. They're only 3 seconds behind Bortoletto in 12th at this point. Hadjar is 5 seconds back from Bearman at this stage. Sainz hasn't completed the overtake at this stage. Sainz hits Bearman, causes him to spin, potentially damages his car, creates a dangerous situation, impacts Bearman's race. How many seconds is he losing through this? Causes Bearman to be definitely knocked down a position now, because while Sainz had nosed himself ahead, he hadn't fully completed that overtake, and that position was still being contested. Now Sainz is ahead of Bearman, and now this Hadjar's car has made it through. There you go. And let's see how long this stays with this to see what the time difference is. Bearman's only just returning to the track there. Plus nearly 3 seconds now behind Sainz. So from being, 3 seconds behind Bortoleto, he's now 8 seconds behind him and another 3 seconds behind. He's now 11 seconds. He's lost at least 8 seconds there. He's lost at least 8 seconds. He's potentially suffered damage to his car, been placed in a dangerous situation, and he's lost 2 positions. One he might have lost to Sainz had the overtake been legal, but it wasn't a legal overtake. So he's now been dropped to 15th, having been in 13th, or at least he was prior to Sainz attempting to overtake him, and he's lost 8 seconds. And yet, he's the one that's been penalised for that by the stewards. That's wrong. That is entirely wrong. So I'm going to make a note of these things, and then in the second part of this, when we go through the infringements that took place in that race that the stewards did not even look at, and then we'll look at how that impacted the overall race result. Thank you for your time on this one.